Some people don't want more connection because what they really crave is less noise. They disappear for hours, sometimes days, and feel guilty for how relieved they are. Not because they hate people, not because they're cold, but because being around others can feel like wearing wet clothes all day. Even good conversations can leave them strangely drained, like their mind stayed switched on too long. They can love deeply and still need distance almost immediately after being close. That contradiction confuses other people. It can even confuse them. They wonder why warmth feels good in the moment, then exhausting afterward. They ask themselves why one dinner, one phone call, one crowded afternoon can flatten them. Why silence feels less lonely than small talk. Why being alone feels more honest than being around people they actually like. And underneath all of it, there's usually a reason that goes deeper than preference. Because needing a lot of time alone is rarely just about being introverted. Sometimes it's about how their nervous system learned to survive the world. Sometimes it's about how early life taught them to monitor everything. The mood in the room, the tone behind the words, the tension nobody named, the disappointment hiding inside someone's smile. When you grow up reading emotional weather before reading your own needs, solitude becomes repair. It becomes the one place where nothing is required from you. No guessing, no adjusting, no performing, no emotional math. Just one room, one body, one mind finally unquenching without asking permission. And that feeling can become sacred, because people who need a lot of time alone usually aren't escaping life. They're escaping overstimulation that other people barely notice. They notice the interruption inside your voice before you finish your sentence. They notice how a friend says they're fine while holding their jaw too tight. They notice the coworker forcing enthusiasm like it costs actual physical energy. They notice who feels left out, who feels angry, who feels fake, who feels fragile. And all that noticing adds up. What looks like quietness is often constant internal processing. Their mind doesn't just hear words. It tracks subtext, contradictions, emotional shifts, and little changes in people's behavior. So while other people leave a room and move on, they keep carrying it. A weird comment, a strange look, a dismissive laugh, a moment that felt slightly off. Their body might leave the conversation, but their mind is still inside it. That's one reason alone feels different to them than it does to others. Alone is where unfinished emotional noise finally settles. It's where their thoughts stop competing with everyone else's energy. It's where they can tell what they actually feel. Because for sensitive, thoughtful people, other people's presence can blur the edges of the self. Not in some dramatic way. In a slow, subtle way. A way that makes them leave social situations unsure whether they were even real. Maybe they laughed when they wanted silence. Maybe they agreed because conflict felt expensive. Maybe they mirrored someone else's mood until they forgot their own. And afterward, they need time alone to separate what was theirs from what wasn't. That's not selfishness. That's emotional decompression. It's the psychological version of taking off shoes that never really fit. A lot of people misunderstand this kind of solitude because they only see the outside. They see canceled plans, late replies, a closed bedroom door, a person who says no thank you more often than expected. And they assume distance means disinterest. But needing space is not the same thing as not caring. In fact, some people need solitude precisely because they care too much. They overconsider. They overfeel. They replay. They absorb. They leave a simple interaction carrying 3 layers of meaning and 7 possible interpretations. So yes, they need a night alone after brunch. Sometimes they need a weekend alone after being emotionally available for everyone all week. Sometimes they need to hear nothing but the refrigerator humming at midnight, because that quiet doesn't demand a version of them. It doesn't need them to be pleasant, useful, funny, responsive, or emotionally balanced. It just lets them exist. And for people who spent years earning safety through adaptation, that matters more than most realize. A lot of them learned early that being around others meant staying slightly alert. Maybe home was unpredictable. Maybe love was warm one day and cold the next. Maybe a parent needed emotional caretaking instead of giving it. Maybe feelings were tolerated only when they were convenient for everybody else. So they became easy, helpful, quiet, watchful, mature too early. And when a child learns that closeness comes with pressure, solitude starts feeling safer than intimacy. Not because closeness is bad, because closeness became associated with effort. Effort to read the room. Effort to prevent conflict. Effort to say the right thing. Effort to hide what might be too much. That pattern often follows them into adulthood without them realizing it. They become the person everyone calls emotionally intelligent, the one who understands everybody, the one who notices things nobody else mentions, the one who can sit in a room and feel every tension line, But there's a hidden cost to being that person. You become easy to lean on and hard to fully see. People appreciate your calm, but rarely ask what it takes to maintain it. They admire your self-awareness, but miss how tired it makes you. They call you independent, while never noticing how often you recover alone. And eventually, solitude stops feeling like a preference and starts feeling like survival. You see it in tiny, everyday moments. They sit in the parked car a little longer before going inside. They don't turn music on right away after a social event. They stare at the ceiling after a gathering, not sad, just overloaded. They ignore texts they fully intend to answer. They need a morning with no conversation before they can hear themselves clearly again. They take long walks without podcasts just to return to their own thoughts. They feel physically tired after being cheerful for too long. They leave group chats muted, not out of rudeness, but self-preservation. They crave friends who don't punish silence. They feel closest to people who don't demand constant access. Because what exhausts them isn't always socializing itself. It's the invisible pressure attached to it. The pressure to be available. The pressure to respond correctly. The pressure to explain their quietness so nobody takes it personally. The pressure to prove that distance doesn't mean rejection. That gets heavy fast, especially when they already spend too much of life translating themselves for other people. And here's where it gets more complicated. A lot of people who need a lot of time alone still feel lonely. That part hurts the most, because they're not choosing between solitude and connection. They're often choosing between peace and overstimulation, between being alone and being misread, between resting honestly and participating half-present just to seem normal. So their loneliness has a specific texture. It's not always about whacking people. It's about lacking people who feel peaceful to be around, people who don't make their body brace, people who don't drain them with unpredictability, ego, or emotional carelessness, people who let silence breathe instead of filling every second, people who don't confuse closeness with constant intrusion. When those people are missing, solitude wins by default, not because it's perfect, because it's gentler. And gentle starts to feel priceless when your mind is already overworked. This is why some people look distant when they're actually protecting something delicate: their attention, their emotional balance, their sense of self, their energy for tomorrow. They know how quickly too much interaction can blur all of it. So they become selective, not superior, selective. That distinction matters, because healthy solitude is not arrogance. It's not secretly believing most people are beneath you. It's recognizing that your inner world has limits and honoring those limits before resentment grows. That's wisdom, even when others call it antisocial. And no, needing a lot of time alone does not automatically make someone deep. Sometimes isolation can become avoidance. Sometimes solitude can hide fear. Sometimes staying alone too long keeps old wounds unchallenged and old stories uncorrected. That's worth being honest about. Because there is a difference between resting and retreating from life completely. There is a difference between self-protection and self-erasure. There is a difference between choosing peace and disappearing because closeness feels impossible. The goal isn't to romanticize isolation. The goal is to understand what your need for solitude is actually saying. Maybe it's saying you're overstimulated. Maybe it's saying you've spent too long shape-shifting around stronger personalities. Maybe it's saying you've ignored your own exhaustion because everybody praised your patience. Maybe it's saying you only feel safe when nobody can interrupt your inner world. Maybe it's saying you need better boundaries, not fewer relationships. That question changes everything. Because once you understand why you need so much time alone, shame starts loosening its grip. You stop labeling yourself difficult. You stop forcing closeness that leaves you drained and strangely resentful. You stop apologizing for not being built for constant access. You start noticing which people calm your system instead of crowding it. You realize some conversations tire you because they require performance, not presence. You realize some relationships feel heavy because they feed on your emotional labor. You realize solitude itself was never the whole answer. It was the place where your mind kept trying to tell you the truth. That truth might be simple. You need more space than other people. You need slower interactions. You need fewer demands. You need relationships where silence doesn't feel suspicious. You need people who understand that withdrawal is sometimes regulation, not rejection. And once you know that, something soft begins to change. You stop seeing your aloneness as a flaw that needs disguising. You begin treating it like information, important information, protective information, even sacred information. Because the people who need a lot of time alone are often carrying more than anyone knows. They are carrying overstimulation no one can see. They are carrying old conditioning that taught them closeness could cost too much. They are carrying sensitivity in a world that rewards numbness and speed. They are carrying minds that do not easily power down. So yes, they disappear sometimes. Yes, they go quiet. Yes, they need rooms with shut doors and hours that belong to nobody else. But that need is not proof that something is wrong with them. It may be proof that they've spent too much of life adapting beyond their limits. And now their body is asking for honesty. Not more performance. Not more availability. Not more pretending they can handle what drains them. Just honesty. The kind that says, I care, but I need space. The kind that says, I love you, but I recover slowly. The kind that says, my silence is not emptiness. It's where I come back to myself. And maybe that's the part people rarely understand. Some people are not hiding in solitude. They are finding themselves there. They are hearing the thoughts that get drowned out around louder personalities. They are meeting emotions that only appear when everything else gets still. They are remembering what they actually want when nobody else is influencing their nervous system. That kind of solitude is not isolation. It's reunion. A quiet reunion with the parts of you that got buried under too much access. So if you've always needed more time alone than other people seem to need, listen closely. Your mind may not be rejecting the world. It may just be asking for a way to stay in it without losing yourself. And that is not weakness. That is not brokenness. That is not a personality flaw you need to explain away. It is a deeply human response to a world that asks for too much. And maybe the healthiest thing you can do is stop fighting that truth. Not to disappear forever. Not to build a life with no closeness. But to choose connection that doesn't cost your entire nervous system. To choose people who don't invade your peace just to feel close. To choose rest before burnout turns your silence into bitterness. To choose a life where solitude is nourishment, not punishment. Because the real goal was never becoming someone who needs nothing. The real goal is becoming someone who understands what they need without shame. And if that includes more silence, more room, and more time alone, let it. Some souls do not heal in crowds. They heal when the noise finally leaves, and they can hear themselves again.